Hello and welcome to another post-season Keep Right On podcast. I'm Alex Dicken, and as ever I'm joined by my co-host and colleague Brian Dick. Just the two of us today. We're going to be going through the 8 senior players at Birmingham City out of contract this summer. Those decisions are probably, and conversations have probably been taking place as we speak, and the released and retained list we will expect towards the end of this month. There's a lot to get onto, Brian. I'm not sure how to kick off this sort of thing. Should we just go straight into it with one of the players?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth saying at the outset is that there are 8 of them. There's also 5 loan players going back, isn't there? So, you know, yes, Blues have got quite a bloated squad, or had quite a bloated squad this season. But, you know, it's been cut in half, isn't it, potentially, with the contractual situation that we're about to discuss. So there is plenty of work to be done. And I think it's also worth signposting the fact that we were talking about having this discussion when Blues we're in the Championship, expecting to be in the Championship next season, didn't we? And relegation to League One, I think I'm right in saying, has maybe altered some of our thinking a little bit. And players that we weren't maybe thinking of suggesting were kept in level 2. We're now sort of thinking slightly differently about some of them, aren't we? Without spoiling too much about what we're about to discuss. Yeah,
100%. I think a couple of months ago, when we were convinced Birmingham City were going to stay in the league, we were even looking at ambitious strikers for next year. But less said about that, the better. Yeah. So start with the goalkeepers, Brian. 2 very experienced goalkeepers on the books, both out of contract. John Ruddy and Neil Etheridge. We'll start with Ruddy because he's been #1 the last 2 seasons. Tell us your thoughts on that one.
What sort of season do you think he's had, Alex? I think it's been okay. It's not been spectacular in my view, but I think it's been okay. And I wouldn't say he's been the problem by any stretch of the imagination.
No, there's been a few errors. I think he was probably most culpable for goals in the defeat of Blackburn Rovers back in beginning of December, end of November time. A lot of things were going wrong at that point in the season, obviously. I don't think his performances were as bad as some people will let on. I think there was probably a little bit of a drop-off from Ruddy in his first season to his second season at Blues, particularly in the games I saw towards the end of the first season. I thought he was quite impressive at that point, but not a significant drop-off. The main thing that we've noticed this season is how differently Blues have asked their goalkeeper to play. John Ruddy simplified Ruddy's game, whereas from the moment Wayne Rooney came in, John Eustace simplified Ruddy's game, whereas from the moment Wayne Rooney came in, there was this emphasis on playing out from the back, wasn't there? And I don't think Ruddy was necessarily suited towards that. We saw when Gary Rowett came in tail end of the season, his performances, improved again. He became more solid, kept 4 clean sheets in those 8 games, and was commanding on set pieces, especially, which was important because of how small the Blues team was. But no, that is a very long-winded way to say I don't think he had a bad season.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, and I think unfortunately the defence in front of him, let him down on quite a number of occasions. And I get the impression as well, Alex, that when it wasn't maybe lacking, but when leadership was lacking, I felt that Ruddy was trying to sort of plug the holes a little bit and step into the breach. And he was certainly saying the right things publicly, and I assume he wasn't sitting on his hands in private meetings either. So yeah, I think certainly not a bad season. The question as to whether to offer him something, obviously all of these things depend on whether players want to stay, and they also depend on both parties reaching the right number, don't they? So we're looking at a 37-year-old goalkeeper. I think key to this really is going to be the Blues manager next season.
Yeah.
If it is Tony Mowbray, then I think necessarily he's going to want to look at a goalkeeper who is who's more confident with the ball at his feet, someone that can help Blues build from the back. And the fact he's 37. You've got to have a succession plan at some point, haven't you? And this feels to me like a decent juncture to break. So whilst I wouldn't be wholly against retaining John Ruddy, I think potentially it would be a no from me, on the basis that this is a rebuild, and if it is going to be possession-based football in League One, and they've got that opportunity to have that philosophical reset, I do think it needs to start from the back, really. We've seen these sweeper keepers, or these keepers that are really good with their feet. They almost seem to be the first line, don't they? That managers come in and say, well, this is the bit we have to get right to start with, because that's the foundation stone, bizarrely. So yeah, I think, regrettably, I would say no, but I'd also want to see the balance of the squad in terms of age and leadership as well.
I think I'm in exactly the same camp, Brian. I wouldn't, if John Ruddy was to be handed a new deal and signed it, I think I'd be very comfortable with it, because of his leadership skills. And I can't speak highly enough of John Ruddy, the goalkeeper and the man as well. I think he's got excellent leadership skills, and we've seen that in a season where very few players have stood up and spoken to the press after games, or been wanting to speak to press after the bad games. John Ruddy has always kind of stepped forward, been one of the players who has. And I remember after the Middlesbrough game, which was a dire game, no one wanted to be put up after that one, and John Ruddy stepped up and delivered some very fair and harsh criticism of his teammates as well. So I'd be quite comfortable with it if he did stay. The reason I'm probably leaning towards letting Ruddy go is that I do think if Blues are going to transition, like you said, Brian, towards this more expansive passing style of football, which the owners are convinced are going to not only get them out of League One, but get them out of the Championship into the Premier League eventually, then I think now is probably the time, with Ruddy at 37 years old, to go down a different route and sign a slightly younger goalkeeper, somebody who can be the club's goalkeeper for the next 4 or 5 years, rather than somebody who's still, we don't know if Ruddy's going to retire this year, going to retire next year or the year after. It's a short-term fix, isn't it? I think now there is chance to look at the longer term for Blues.
Yeah, I'd say so. I agree. Like you say, wouldn't be the world's worst person. That's damning with extremely faint praise, isn't it? He would be a good person. Would be a good person to have around the around the squad. But as a starter, I think we need to be being a bit more progressive, really. So yeah, that's where I am with that one, which leads us on to the other one, the other goalkeeper, doesn't it? Neil Etheridge. I can't really ask you what sort of season Neil's had, or indeed what sort of 2 seasons Neil's had, because he's not actually played very much, has he?
Yeah, I mean, I've probably only seen him play, I think, 3 or 4 times. So yeah, he looked rusty when he played his last game against. Actually, no, he played a couple of games in the league this year, didn't he? He looked a little bit rusty on that FA Cup game against Hull, but I don't think he did anything wrong in those league games against West Brom and Sheffield Wednesday, to be honest. We know he's a capable goalkeeper in the Championship. He'd be a capable goalkeeper in League One, but again, he's another goalkeeper who's ageing, probably one who's not the best with his feet, similarly to Ruddy in that respect. And I'd probably let Etheridge go and let him go somewhere else to finish his career, to be honest. That's more of a simple one than the Ruddy one for me. I think Etheridge, who he hasn't played in 2 years, I think Blues need to move on from him and find a younger goalkeeper, if they are going to have Ruddy or an experienced goalkeeper, then a younger guy next to him, or 2 potentially young goalkeepers.
Yeah, indeed, and I'm not sure Neil Etheridge should want to spend the remaining years of his contract, of his career, being back up somewhere. He's 34 now. I'm sure he would want to go and play first team football. So yeah, that, like you say, that one seems much more logical. I think. So what was it this season? I think it was 4 games this season, a couple of league and a couple in the cup, and then 8 games last season. He was the cup goalkeeper last season. So yeah, just it's not enough, is it, to sort of keep career momentum going on. So yeah, and let's just say Blues do keep Ruddy. You want them to have a younger goalkeeper in as well, don't you? It's absolutely critical that they go and get somebody. That they go and get somebody younger and maybe better suited to the style of play. So yeah, it's a no from me on that one as well.
Yeah, it wouldn't be an awful idea, would it, to have, if you do keep John Ruddy, then to have a younger guy who could potentially learn from him, then take over the reins at some point in the season. I think Sheffield Wednesday did that with David Stockdale when they got promoted from League One last time. I think they had a younger goalkeeper come through later in the season and take over. So I don't think that would be a bad choice, but from looking at it straight now, I'd probably say 2 new goalkeepers, both of a younger mould.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and what I would say is, I'd want the number one to be the first choice, to be not a lone goalkeeper. I think Blues need to find their forever goalkeeper. Don't they, for now, or at least for a few years anyway. So yeah, there's some good ones down in the lower leagues. So yeah, hopefully they can get their scouting network out and come back with a couple.
Some more difficult ones now, Brian. Mark Roberts, slightly controversial with supporters, I know, has been at least throughout the time I've covered the club, been at the club 7 years, out of contract. There's obviously an option there to extend it by a further 12 months if the club wants to. He's played 196 games for Blues, Brian, and he's been available an awful lot. But the one thing we both said when we were speaking before we came on air is that the last 2 seasons, there has been a decline in the number of games that he's been playing per season. He played 25 league games last year. It's 14 this year, including plus 2 cup games, so 16 in total. And he's had three separate calf injuries this year. Bravely played through one of those calf injuries in March when Blues had a shortage of centre-backs trying to get through the games and eventually couldn't. But I just think those injuries are probably catching up with Mark Roberts now for me. He's probably at an age 33, coming 34 this summer, where he's obviously entering the twilight of his career. He's maybe got one more contract in him. I'm just not sure that should be at Blues. I think he's probably going to be an asset to a club in League One. But I think if the club, again, we're talking about playing style, is going to go for a more of a progressive playing out from the back style, and that's obviously we started that with the goalkeeper discussion, then they're going to need centre-backs who play that way as well. And if the club is hopefully going to win promotion, you want centre-backs like Ipswich have had, who can do well in League One, playing that style, and then go and transfer it into the Championship. So I don't think you're building for the long term if you keep Mark Roberts in your team. Yeah.
Do you read anything into the fact that his wife posted on Instagram? It wasn't cryptic, but it was kind of suggesting that the 7-year adventure had moved on, and there was talk about moving, physically moving house and the family. Read anything? Can we read anything into that? Or
I think it's hard not to. I know she edited her post later on saying that this is not an announcement. Obviously, Mark Roberts himself and the club will announce that when the time's right. But it's hard not to read anything into that when it seems pretty final, doesn't it? And it has been 7 years, and I think nobody at the start of the season would have expected Mark Roberts to stay at Blues beyond the end of the season. We're probably only having this discussion now because Blues are going to be in League One, and we know that Mark Roberts, having played very well in that league previously with Barnsley, could be an asset to a League One club going forward, I reckon.
I think for me it comes back to the best ability being availability, and as you say, he's had 3 periods out on the sidelines this season. There were 2 last season as well. He missed, I think, 3 months for quite early on in John Eustace's full season. So yeah, you just, particularly at the centre of defence, you need combinations that are going to be there regularly and consistent, don't you? So it's not to say that Mark Roberts hasn't got many attributes that would probably fit quite well in League One, or indeed the Championship. I think they missed his aerial presence most of the season, to be honest with you. And I'm absolutely not one a Mark Roberts critic whatsoever. I think he's done a good job for the club. I think when his big contract came to an end, he took a more team-friendly contract to stay around, and I respect him for that. But yeah, you just want the players available, don't you? And unfortunately, I think for Robbo, the injuries are starting to pile up a little bit. And for me, it would be a time for both to move on. And it's just sad for Roberts that it's ended the way it has, because I think he's been a loyal servant to Blues. I think he's really, stuck by them under a lot of personal criticism, under a lot of negative sort of sequences of results and bad seasons, and under difficult ownership. So I think he'll always be welcome back at Birmingham City for me. But again, it's about moving on to the future now and pressing the reset button in League One. So it's with a thank you. But I do think it's time to go separate ways again. Yeah.
You make a good point about the availability of the centre backs, Brian, because you do want a pair that play regularly together over the course of a season. And Blues did not have that last season. They had probably almost 10 different central defensive partnerships over the course of the season, and it must have contributed to the poor defensive displays we saw as well. So
yeah, and I think just to take that on a bit further, Derby County have obviously just come up from League One to the Championship, and their season was built around Aaron Cashin and the other centre backs, Curtis Nelson. So they've had this partnership, and it feels like they played together every single week. And sometimes Paul Wall would go to a back three with Sonny Bradley coming into the team, but that relationship that maybe played 40 games together, it felt was absolutely key to the stability of that side. So yeah, I think Blues need to be looking at building something like that themselves.
Next one, Gary Gardner. We're going through the team, through the positions. Gary Gardner barely played last season, Brian. Hasn't played much football in the last 2 seasons. Obviously suffered with big injury problems in 22-23. Came back, kind of worked his way back slowly in pre-season last year. I remember being out in Spain and he was doing a lot of work on his own, away from the group, just kind of his own physical fitness work. Didn't really play. I don't think he played in pre-season. And then his pre-season was almost those Carabao Cup games in August. But the key point I'm trying to make is that he was available for the vast majority of last season, if not all of it. Take out the first month, and he was available pretty much every game. On the bench, an awful lot. On the bench, in the squad, 40 times, 40 plus times in all competitions. So I guess what I'm trying to ask you, Brian, is do you think he could be an asset in League One?
I think we made reference at the top, didn't we, to relegation maybe changing some of our perceptions about what might happen. And I think Gary Gardner is a case in point in this.
Yeah.
Am I right? If the club got an option, it's not an option, is it? It's just
I don't think
so. It's just a contract ending, isn't it? So what I would say is I think the season before last, the Eustace one was really blighted by injuries. I think he only managed 10 games in the 22-23 season, and he hasn't played many more this season, but he has been in 41 championship squads, which kind of to me suggests that he's put the fitness issues behind him. So interesting one. I'm verging on yes, actually, where I wasn't maybe two weeks ago, but I am verging on the yes now, on the basis that the fitness seems to be better. On the basis that Blues are going to be having some fairly physical matches down in League One, and I think Gary will potentially he's a physically strong man, isn't he? So I think he'd be useful in that scenario. And also, I don't really want to go too badge kissy and thumping the club drum too much, but the fact that he is Blues and he has an affinity for the club, I think that matters, to a degree. And that's not the same as saying get any Blues fan in and give him a shirt and a set of boots and a contract, but it's just another string to Gardner's bow. So yeah, I am coming down on the yes side of things. I think, yeah.
Gary Rout said actually in the final few weeks of the season what a great character Gary Gardner is to have around the place, and I think he said before the Coventry game, obviously Gardner had barely played a minute and was the guy in the dressing room kind of getting the players up for the game, telling them how important it was. And yeah, again, he said final day of the season against Norwich that Gardner was absolutely desperate to play and said that, he's been suffering with a slight injury, but was willing to get himself fit and get himself ready to go on the pitch if Rout needed him. So people speak very highly of him as a character. So, we've spoken about potentially losing John Ruddy. I don't think we can completely strip the squad of experience and good characters. I think you still need those leaders in the dressing room. And Gardner, I think, in the latter part of this season has been highlighted as a leader. So you mentioned his physicality. That's another asset in League One. I think he could be a useful player to have in League One. I don't think he'll be a starting midfielder, somebody who plays 40 games a season. I think there'll be other midfielders ahead of him, but as somebody to come in for certain games, somebody to potentially close out games, I think he'd be quite useful. So I'm also, now the club is in League One, I'm probably in favour of giving Gary Gardner a year.
Yeah, and we're just only scratching the surface of his set piece brilliance as well, aren't we?
Well, exactly. I was surprised that didn't come close to the goal of the season. I think it was a Stansfield moment, wasn't it, against Plymouth? But that was an absolute belter. So, yeah.
I mean, for me, that was goal of the season. I'm really not expecting it to go where it did, but I agree. I say yes, and entrust him with a bit of leadership, and not saying giving me armband, but encourage him to step forward and be one of the voices in the changing room, and one of the links between the people in the stand and the people on the pitch.
Halfway through, Brian, 4 to go. Another midfielder, Ivan Sunjic. I think we're both going to be pretty quick on this one, aren't we, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I've said all season, for many months, that I think it's time for Sunjic to move on. He hasn't justified the £6 million fee. The fee's not his fault, and I would say that he's been one of the better players under Rowett, hasn't he? He's come in and he's brought some of what was needed, including a goal against Coventry he scored. But yeah, if new Blues are going to be all about ball retention and dominating possession, then Sunjic isn't that for me, and I'd be really surprised if he sees his future in League One. I really, I'd be not a difficult one at all for me.
Yeah, Sunjic is an example of a very poor transfer from the old regime, isn't he? In terms of the contract given out, obviously the fee, which is obviously a record for the club. But yet, the way he's played in 5 years at Blues has made him quite popular with fans. I know a lot of fans would probably, like you, Brian, be like, okay, now's the time to move on. But you can never fault his commitment. You never fault his effort. Even when the final, as you mentioned, the final four games of the season, he came into the starting 11 when, he obviously knew that, his future didn't like Birmingham City, and yet he gave his absolute all in those games and was quite emotional after scoring against Coventry, so you could see what it means to him. I think he leaves with everyone's best wishes, and I hope he gets a decent move wherever that is, in whatever country that is.
Yeah, indeed. Which leaves us with 3 to do. Keshi Anderson is the next one. Now, this is an interesting one, isn't it? Keshi Anderson obviously signed after a successful trial last summer. Did really well in pre-season, didn't he? He was absolutely outstanding and fully earned his deal. It was a 1-year deal with an option. So we're not talking about a new contract. We're potentially talking about invoking the option, whatever the terms of that option are. Whether it's I don't know whether it's a wage increase or what it would mean. But what have you made of Keshi Anderson's season?
God, I asked him this question actually when I spoke to him a few weeks ago, and he basically just puffed his cheeks out and couldn't explain it himself.
You do it for him then.
So yeah, he started so well, didn't he? Those first 8 or 9 league games he started, probably, I think by his own admission, played a little bit too much early on, and should have said to John Eustace at the time that I need a break, because coming off a season where he barely played at all, he played too much, and lo and behold, hamstring injury at the end of September, and that put him out for 3 months. Came back, and Wayne Rooney was the manager. Only had, I think, 3 games under him. Was used as a substitute a few times, and then obviously Tony Mowbray came in. Mowbray obviously wanted to go with other players, and Anderson wasn't at the top of his pecking order. And at the end of January, Mowbray was willing to let Anderson go out so that he could potentially try and bring someone else in late in the day. That obviously didn't happen. Anderson barely got a start under Mowbray, then had another little injury before winning his place back in the team right at the end of the season. So there was actually, 6 months between Anderson's championship start in September when he got injured until his next one against Coventry in the middle of April. Played the final 4 games of the season. I was quite impressed, and we've said throughout the season how intelligent he is. I think that's one of his real selling points and strengths. He fits into different systems and he fits in well. Does his defensive side better than any of the left winger Blues have had this season.
Not a massively high bar, that, is it?
It's not. Sariki Dembele's one for another day, Brian. I think in League One, I think you could tempt Anderson down with the right deal. Blues obviously don't have to take that option. They could negotiate something else with him. I would. I think Anderson in League One would be a strong player. I think he'd be a good player, be a starting player, or he should be at least. But again, it's probably one that depends on the manager. If Tony Mowbray does come back, is he going to want Keshi Anderson? These are all very difficult decisions, and probably why we need clarity on the manager. My own personal opinion, which is what this podcast is in aid of, is to say that I would give Keshi Anderson a new contract.
Yeah, I think we're basically going to agree with each other right the way through this. I would as well. I think that the point you make about the tactical flexibility, that's really important. If there is a criticism of Anderson, and I think we've both said it before, it's the lack of goals and assists. So I think there were 2 assists this season.
Yep.
From 24 games, and a decent number of starts in those 24 games. And he really doesn't look like a natural finisher, does he? He seems to want to have an extra touch, or seems so keen to get it on target that he ends up hitting the keeper a lot of the time. That said, I think he could be effective in League One as well. We've just looked back at his career, and he spent a lot of his career in League One, and even in League Two at times. So yeah, I think that experience, that knowledge of the league, the tactical flexibility, the intelligence. I think also he's not an absolute flyer. He's quick in mind rather than foot. But I think that could he could have more success in tangible returns in League One. So yeah, I'm a yes with him as well.
Yeah, I was just thinking back to the games against Cheltenham away and Leicester away in the FA Cup when he missed a dozen chances. I've no idea how he didn't score in that Cheltenham one. It could have been 10-0 to Blues that night, to be fair. Yeah, moving on to Scott Hogan. Brian, go on, kick us off. I'm naturally going to keep him, so you go on.
Yeah, it's no, you're not. It's a no from me. The journey has very much reached its conclusion. It's slowed to a stop, basically, hasn't it? Three. We're just doing that before we came on here. We were just totting up the stats. 3 goals since the World Cup break of 2022. So when was the World Cup break? Was it November, December time, wasn't it, of 2022? 3. He scored against Swansea again. Towards the end of that season, that bizarre 4-3 comeback, having missed a penalty as well, and then he scored twice this season. So, and maybe it's not his fault, but when Blues are crying out for a striker, and towards the end of the season, maybe he was ready and fit and firing, but in the few chances that Rowett gave him, it just didn't look like he was going to be able to change the game. So. No, 32 years old. I'm not handing Scott Hogan another contract.
My biggest frustration with Hogan last season was Hughes obviously used him quite a bit at the start of the season, and then it was clear that Rooney did not want anything to do with him after that first game. But Mowbray started him his first game and gave him chances, and then Rowett seemed willing to work with him. I think he gave him a couple of sub appearances and seemed willing to work with him. By the end of it, Scott Hogan wasn't in the matchday squads. So I think there was an opportunity for him to not win a new contract, but to end his Blues career in the right way this season. And I think it just kind of followed the pattern of the last probably 18 months. These final few months have, and I don't think any Blues fans will be sad to see him leave, to be fair.
Yeah, and do you know, even when he's integrated and involved and playing week in, week out, he's still he was always streaky. You know, we'll never. I don't think we'll ever really get away from the old pre-lockdown Hogan and post-lockdown Hogan. Pre-lockdown, he was when he first came to Blues on loan from the other place. He was scoring with virtually every chance he had. Absolutely clinical. Post-lockdown, he just didn't look the same player. And you know, he's just a player that goes for weeks and months without scoring, isn't he? And you can't build a team around that inconsistency. So no, that's a really clear one for me.
Agreed. Final one, Lukas Djukovic, verging on club legend at this point, Brian. Getting close. There's one.
Yeah, I mean,
close.
Yeah. What do they call him? A club legend in a headline? I think
when he retires. Well, not now, Brian, but 15 years down the line, I reckon you would.
Yeah, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Yeah, not quite legend yet for me. You know, you talk about Oberfabi Martins and Trevor Francis, aren't you? And people like this for that sort of status. But you know, a treasured player. You know, I make no secret of the fact that, you know, I like him as a bloke and rate him as a player, and you know, he's given some really difficult interviews at times when Blues have lost, and I respect that about him. I respect the fact that he stuck himself together with gaffer tape and glue and Pritt stick when he was towards the end of the season and gave it a go. So that's past Djukovic. We're talking about the future, aren't we? I'm going to say yes, I would keep him in League One. Yeah, and I know, you know, people are probably spitting whatever they're drinking out at the moment, just hearing that, but not as an every game starter, but as a guardian of the values and a driver of standards, and as a useful player off the bench or even from the start, you know, and when certain games dictate it. I think Djukovic's assets shouldn't be lightly discarded. So no. Yeah, on the right terms, obviously, and we've said that before. You know, the money has to work for everybody. But yes, yeah, I would.
League One's obviously slightly different to the Championship. You're not going to get the teams that press so relentlessly as they do at the top of the Championship now. Blues, you would hope in the Championship, will be a team that has a lot of the ball. So that would also play to Djukovic's strengths if he could just play up front, and Blues were getting crosses in from wide because they were dominating possession. I think one of the key things I wanted to speak about with Djukovic, Brian, is that his injury record, you know, is pretty remarkable, really, when you think of his time at Blues. And I know you mentioned before we came on that he joined Blues with a bit of a checkered injury past. But in the eight seasons that he's been here, he's been pretty much always available, apart from for that injury layoff he had this season, you know, before the March international break. So I do think Blues would have been better served in those final weeks of the season had Djukovic been available. I definitely think Gary Rout would have looked to start him in some of those games. And I'm in your camp. I think, you know, I think he's worth another year in League One. I think he could be an asset. I don't think he'd be my first choice striker, but I think, you know, if there's a striking quartet, I think he'd be a really valuable player in that. So I do hope his story has got another chapter to be written at Blues, because I think it'd be nice if it didn't end in a relegation and then it ended with him leading the club back into the Championship or helping the club get back into the Championship.
Indeed, that's everybody, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it is.
Yeah, so I suppose all that remains to be said is please give us your thoughts in the comments section, or, you know, contact us on Twitter with what you think about which way these calls should go. As ever, thanks everyone for listening. Hit subscribe or follow us on whatever your favourite podcast platform is. But yeah, from Alex and me again, it's a keep right on.